Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works, proudly supported by Valvoline and Sparesbox. Don't forget BCW5 on checkout. Today we're back on the Cresta. Some of you may be aware that New South Wales drag racing has changed, or Sydney Dragway I should say, has actually changed from IHRA to ANDRA. That means that we've got to get this car as well as the Mustang, we've actually got to get both of those cars recertified to race at the track. There's a lot of politics in the background. I don't want to get involved in that. I just want to go racing, so whatever. But with that in mind, we're actually going to be upgrading the tech on the Cresta to go faster. We're on the cusp of running 7s. We do have some things that will hopefully ensure that happens pretty soon. If you've been following my Instagram, there's probably a few little teasers on there, but I'm not going to give it away until you go and check it out. So secrets ahoy. But yeah, in upgrading the tech, there's a few things that we need to do. One primarily to the car, and also upgrade some safety equipment. So I've got a Simpson neck restraint that has to be used when you run quicker than 799, I believe, or 799 or faster. And the other major thing is a fire system. So what we are doing today is a full installation of the fire system. We've got a DJ safety kit from Motorsport Connections in Sydney. This is a 350 cubic inch setup, and that doesn't refer to your motor. It actually refers to the size of the bottle. So there's a 300 cube or a 350 cube bottle. You can get away with a smaller bottle in say a rail car or a chassis car, but being that there's probably a lot more line length in this vehicle than some of those smaller chassis cars or rail cars, you want that extra propellant behind it to actually give you more bottle pressure for longer. It has the exact same amount of fire suppressant in it, so it's got the same material between the 300 and 350 cube bottle, but as I said, you've got more propellant in that cylinder to allow it to completely evacuate the cylinder and fill all the lines properly. The one thing I didn't realise in my head, I was planning on sort of the installation of this kit before I got it and before I read the instructions. A lot of people probably aren't aware that it's basically a parallel system, not a series system, where there's two lines that come out of the injector head on the bottle. Our kit is slightly different to the normal kit you order purely because there's a lot more line length in this, so we're going to be using a lot of Raceworks Teflon to actually plumb it. You can get the kit with all aluminium tubing, but there would have been a ton of tube to go into this car, and trying to straighten and run all that stuff. I'm a little bit OCD with tubing, so we would have been here for 5 days installing a fire system. So being that the Raceworks stuff is a lot more flexible, we can kind of run it and P-clip it and get it in a nice path without having to spend literally days straightening aluminium tube. Basically, there's 3 nozzles that go into the vehicle. You've got one which actually mounts under the steering column and faces directly back at the driver, and then you've got 2 in the engine bay. The unfortunate thing is if you do have an engine bay fire and not a cabin fire, it deploys all 3. They're all connected, so there's no way to isolate each one. But the really good thing about the DJ safety is it uses a substance called cold fire, which is water and natural plant-based materials, and it's completely water soluble, so you can wash it off. It's not corrosive and it's not bad. Things like you may get a very minor skin reaction, but it's not really harsh like some fire suppressants. Like say a lot of your dry powder extinguishers, they're super corrosive and they're really hard to clean off of cars. I've been unfortunate enough to have to use one on a car before, and trying to clean that powder, I guess you'd say, off of cars after it's been deployed, it's a bit of a nightmare. And as soon as you leave it, you start to find little rust spots in your engine bay, and you can just never get rid of it 100%. It's always something somewhere, and it's just not fun. So yeah, having this system and something that's easy to clean up, even your race suit, you literally just get it cleaned any other way you would normally clean it. So yeah, if you get this the cold fire on either the car, the interior, or yourself, it's super easy cleanup, and that's one thing I really like about it. So enough talking. Let's start having a look at how we're going to lay this thing out. I've just picked the mounting position for the cylinder. Now it's pretty critical in the way you actually mount these, and it's actually total opposite. If you've ever installed a nitrous system, you kind of always want the bottle to be faced in line with the car and tilted down towards the back so that your siphon tube actually picks up from the back of the cylinder when you're accelerating. These bottles are basically the totally opposite, and you want to mount it. The best mounting position is actually across the vehicle. I don't know exactly why that is, but that's what the instructions say, so that's what we're going to do. We've actually got a void in front of the fuel cell, which we don't really use for anything anyway, so I think that's a pretty good spot. And the other reason I want to put it kind of in this area inside of the roll cage is because if, God forbid, we have a massive accident and the car is impacted pretty heavily on either side, this fire system is always going to be protected, because the bigger accidents are going to be when you're going to need that fire system. So I hope to never be in that position, but you do need to kind of think of those things when you're putting your car together. It's another reason why we've got this big beam around the fuel cell as well. Either for a rear impact or a side impact, there's a lot less chance of actually rupturing the cell in an accident. It's not foolproof, but it'll give us every chance to try and keep the thing together. But yeah, it's pretty important to pick the correct spot for your cylinder. And as I said, you kind of want it across the body, not parallel with it. So yeah, work out where your mounting position that's going to work. Most cars, you're probably going to be able to sort of tuck it in the boot between your rear wheel tubs. There's a fair bit of room, and if you are stuck for room, you can go back to that 300 cubic inch bottle. But as I said, for a full body sedan type car, I definitely recommend, if you can fit the 350 cube bottle, to go that, because it's just more chance of it working effectively. The one thing you do need to keep in mind, obviously, is you've got your bottle height plus your injector on top of that, and then you've got to put the cable which actually drives the injector on top of that as well. So it's not a right angle fitting into the top of the bottle, it goes directly into the top for the drive cable. So you do need to kind of work out your cable path and whatnot before you go actually mounting your bottle. The only other thing I've noticed too is the brackets for the bottle only have a provision for a side mount. So we'll probably make some angled tabs to just basically turn into a base mount bracket. I may or may not actually do that today, but I really want to focus today on actually getting the cable installed and all of the plumbing done. And the only other thing I want to do before I drill holes and actually mount the cylinder is go up and have a look under the body where we can pass the propellant lines through. The fire system lines through, because we don't want to be mounting our cylinder directly above a bulkhead or say a rail or a channel in the body that we can't pass the line through. So I'm going to basically, now that I know roughly where that's going to be, I'm going to go up and have a look. We do have some Raceworks bulkhead straight and 90-degree fittings as well, so we've got plenty of options to actually plumb it. We've also got a ton of Dash 4 stainless 90s and straights as well, so that should get us out of trouble, along with the braid that we always use. So let's go up and have a look. Now, before anyone freaks out, this is only interim so we can get the lines run correctly. I don't want to go drilling holes in the car until we know which way the line's actually going to run. So for now, I've literally just terminated one end. And I like to run the line out and cut it to length rather than cut what I think is going to be the right length and most likely throw about this much hose out because this much hose 5 times over ends up being a metre, and this hose isn't cheap, so I'd much prefer to actually use exactly what we need, and it just means I can run it neatly and plan the run before, like I said, cutting up a roll of hose and ending up with an offcut that's most likely not a usable length. I've mentioned a few times in this episode as well as previous ones about bulkhead fittings. Now I thought it's actually worth explaining what they are because a lot of people probably don't quite understand what a bulkhead fitting is. Basically it's either, for the most part, a straight or a 90-degree male to male joiner where you can put a hose on either side, or a hose end should I say, on either side of it. However, one leg is a lot longer, which allows you to actually put a nut on it and mount it into a panel or a channel or a structure. They're not fluid tight, as in you can't put it through the side of a catch can or something and then have a fitting on the other side of it. Obviously the fitting itself is fluid tight, but there's no O-ring sealing it onto whatever you're putting it through. So it's not designed, say, if you wanted to add an extra fitting to a fuel tank or something like that. But yeah, they're really good for running fittings through or running plumbing through a panel. And the Raceworks ones with the bends on them are a full flow style fitting, so they don't reduce size in through the radius of the bend, which is really nice. And then yeah, you've got obviously the straights as well, which is a straight fitting, so there's never going to be a reduction in that either. But yeah, handy little tip if you are plumbing through panels or whatnot. This one obviously we've got to go through the boot floor twice and we've got to go through the firewall twice. For that reason, as I mentioned before, we've got these jets. We've got to have one inside the cabin facing the driver and 2 in the engine bay. So we've got to actually pass through a lot of stuff, whereas say a chassis car or a rail, there's probably not a lot of bulkheads going on, so, or firewalls should I say, so it's easy to run lines and stuff through pre-existing holes or cars that just don't have those panels at all. So yeah, when you're running fluid through, these are super handy. We've also used them before in Adam's S13 where we did both the fuel system and the cooling system. We ran through bulkheads, both the front and the rear of the vehicle. So yeah, just nice little fittings to make it heaps easier. And then you don't run the risk of rubbing through either your rubber or your Teflon line, passing through panels. Even when you put grommets in, they can wear out or split or fall out. So yeah, super safe solution, and in my opinion, the right solution. got the fire system to the point where we've run all of our lines under the car. We've got our boot portion plumbed. I haven't actually mounted the bottle purely because the brackets I've currently got, I'm not super happy with how they work. I'm actually thinking I might go and try and find a quick release bracket because you actually need to mount the bottle into those brackets and bolt the brackets to the car. And that may actually be pretty hard to remove the bottle for service, which, I mean, they do only come out every 2 years, but it doesn't look like a fun time to actually install or remove it. So I'd much prefer to at least have a look and see if there's another option before I drill the car to suit that. In saying that, everyone's install is going to be different, so the actual mounting of the bottle portion isn't really critical to the episode overall. But yeah, we've got all our lines run, they're all P-clipped to the underside of the car. It is also pretty crucial to make sure you run your lines as high under the car as possible, because if for whatever reason you are in an accident and they are the lowest point and they get hit, basically where the line gets cut is where the fire system stops. So if for whatever reason you cut the line at the diff, you've got no fire system. So yeah, it's pretty important to actually get that correct. It's also worth running all of your lines, especially in the bay as well, as far away from heat sources as possible. Some of our system is actually behind the pre-existing heat shield that I built quite a while ago. So yeah, now we're just going to attack the under dash portion of the hoses, which is basically running from the passenger side to the nozzle back to the driver's side to basically complete the circuit. So we're going to actually be mounting our under dash nozzle. There's a really convenient aircon vent under the dash directly under the steering column that I don't use anymore. And mounting it in there it'll be a nice stealth install and not have to cut any more dash trims. All I'm going to do is physically remove the aircon vent and then mount it either to the dash portion or maybe even to that plastic panel. I'd prefer most likely to mount it to the dash, but it will really depend what bracketry or what materials are already under there in that position. Mounting it to the dash isn't going to be a massive issue, but I would prefer to not mount it to plastic, because worst case, if there was an interior fire and the dash was to melt, that nozzle could fall down. But in saying that, hopefully by that point I'm well and truly clear of the car. So these are all things you do need to think about. Racing's dangerous, so you do need to be mindful of the what ifs. Everyone goes, oh, it'll never happen to me, but I've seen people nearly die in cars. It's pretty gnarly. So this is sort of stuff you need to think of when you're racing a car. Safety gear in particular. A friend of mine only said yesterday, there's no cost for safety. Like, your life's worth more than the safety gear you buy. So it's worth not always shopping on price points, specifically on safety like helmets or your neck restraints, your fire suits and stuff, because you can't necessarily come back from that if there is a big accident. So I know it's a bit of a dark one, but it is definitely worth considering when you're doing your safety gear to not cheap out. What coin? What coin is that? Ah, one dime. You're a dime. Well, we've had another successful day. It was actually a lot longer task than I'd anticipated, which is actually quite common with AN plumbing. Everyone looks at these AN systems and goes, oh yeah, that's a couple of hours worth of work. And realistically, there's probably, in plumbing this car alone, I'd say there's probably at least 200 hours in it. I suppose you could probably rush it and have a less neat of a job. But I get a little bit OCD with running all the hoses and getting all the stuff. I even measured the nozzles to make sure they were pretty well symmetrical in the middle of the bay. With the whole fire system, obviously we've got a nozzle on the passenger side, which is going to cover basically the inlet manifold and the fuel inlet side. And we've got one on the driver's side, which is basically going to cover all of our turbo hot side stuff. It's basically aimed directly at the back of the turbo, which will include the turbo beanie. Obviously, if we get an oil feed line issue, that's going to spray oil on that side of the bay. Obviously our third nozzle is under the steering column, which will fire directly back at me. As I mentioned before, unfortunately you can't actually divide the system, so if I deploy the bay, I'm going to need a shower, but not a massive deal. Massive thank you to Raceworks as always for their support. We've used all of their plumbing today in the system, bar a very few things that actually came with the fire system, so yeah, running all that through is super easy as usual, getting it all assembled nice and neat. And yeah, it's all running really well. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.